Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
You want a quality education that's worth every single penny of your hard-earned money. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent. And it is Thursday, January 17th, and welcome to episode number 51, How to Select a Test Prep or Tutoring Company. In this week's news, there's an uproar over blended and active learning. And we're in chapter 51 of 171 answers, and we're sharing the ways to select a good test prep or tutoring company for your kid. And this week's question is from a mom who wants to know if there are funds available for transfer students. And Mark continues his conversation with Rick Clark, Director of Undergraduate Admissions at Georgia Tech. But this week, Rick is sharing what you probably don't know about Georgia Tech.
Anika, you're going to be proud of me.
Am I?
I didn't watch Bird Box, but I heard about it this week.
Baby steps. I'll take it.
Yes. I heard a conversation how people were walking around with some kind of blindfolds and they were like, don't do it. It's dangerous. And so that's what I heard. That's all I know.
Thank you. We'll take that, Mark. Good job. Okay, but can I give you another test? The Good Place. Have you heard of The Good Place?
No.
Have you seen The Good Place?
No. What is it?
This is your new homework assignment.
I'm not a movie person.
It's not a movie, Mark. It's a show. Well, okay, now this one is, you're right. Bird Box was a movie. It was a Netflix movie. But this one is a television show with Kristen Bell, Ted Danson, all off the charts. It is so awesome. And I'm not into spoilers, so I'm not going to spoil it for you.
No promises. No promises. But listen, I have to share something else. A shout out to Melissa in Manhattan, one of our most dedicated listeners. We have such sharp listeners, and you may remember 6 or 8 episodes ago, I really encouraged all of our listeners to Google a great article Brendan Barnard had done on rankings. And I said, go to Washington Post, put Brendan Barnard in and rankings. And so I got this great email saying, Mark, that article was in Forbes. So I just want to do a little correction. Go to Forbes, type in challenge success, ignore college rankings, Forbes, Brendan Barnard. It is an amazing read.
Awesome.
Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right, this week's article is entitled Furor over Blended and Active Learning. And this is found in Inside Higher Ed by Mr. Mark Lieberman. And the way it goes is that business students at the University of Central Florida are super upset with the institution because the schools have sprung this new learning model on them that has the majority of their learning time outside of the classroom and reduces their exposure to instructors. And of course, university administrators say that their approach is educationally sound, but in this reduced class time format, students work in group projects during I think they meet like 5 sessions throughout the whole semester. They have to read online textbooks, and they watch 3-minute instructional videos, and they complete textbook assignments. Now, under the previous model they were under, professors delivered 2 weekly, the traditional 75-minute lectures that students could attend or watch online. So, Mark, this new model eliminates the lecture element and requires students to learn much of the course content on their own. And they only get 75 minutes of face-to-face time with their instructor all semester. So one of the student leaders that are leading up this protest, they've signed this big petition against it. His statement is that a lot of students don't learn this way or retain the information, and they're having to teach themselves. Now, what the school is saying is that the reasons that they're doing this is it was twofold, the way the article states. And one is that this new model actually increases access and affordability, because it's just a format that allows them to cater to more students to attend the school. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, they're saying that this is important for students to get soft skills and decision-making skills that they need to succeed in the workplace. Now, when you put it like that, I get it. But I do have mixed feelings about it. And I'm so curious, Mark, to hear what side you're leaning toward.
That's $1 million question, because, I'm actually surprised, Anika, that we made it to episode 51 without talking about this, because this is one of the biggest trends in in college life right now, and that is this shift to what's sometimes called blended learning, hybrid learning, active learning. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the inverted classroom. About 5 to 8 years ago, I don't know if you've ever heard of the term MOOCs, but it's an acronym. It's an acronym that stands for Massive Open Online Courses. And, a couple of common ones are edX and Coursera. And these ones were seen as the future of education, where you're going to have you get a master teacher and take advantage of technology and take advantage of online resources. And it's a hot debate, and there's advantages and disadvantages to blended learning, hybrid learning, active learning, inverted classroom. So let's start with some of the advantages. There are advantages. You can take advantage of all the online resources that are out there, videos, lectures, group online discussions from master teachers to convene and process and reinforce what you've learned. And there's different versions really of this. There's pure online. Of course, instruction occurs on an online platform with periodic face-to-face meetings. You've got rotational version, where students rotate between self-paced online learning and face-to-face instruction, and schedules are fixed but flexible. You've got flex learning, where most instruction is delivered online with teachers providing needed support in small group settings. You've got personalized blend. Teachers design face-to-face and anywhere, anytime learning options that straddle the physical classroom and virtual spaces, and learning is constant and time is variable. You've got an online lab. Instructions take place in brick and mortar lab delivered by an online teacher supervised on site by paraprofessionals. And you've got other versions as well. You've got a self-blend version and face-to-face. So there are advantages to this, Anika. Besides teaching being less expensive to deliver and more affordable and saving time, can you think of any other advantages?
No, I think you captured the bulk of them.
There are advantages,
okay,
right? There's the flexibility, right, in terms of anywhere, anytime, availability. Global resources, the self-pace that you can do. There's the tracking mechanisms that you can do, the chat rooms. So it's taking technology and it's taking this information age that we're in and combining all that in combination with the instructor, but the instructor is not in the central role they previously were in. And a couple of the universities that have been leaders have been University of Central Florida and Indiana. Those are two of the major schools that have taken a lead role. Now, as to what you were saying and the article, I wanted to say all that and go over some of the advantages, because if I was at UCF, I'd be right there joining the petition right with this brother dude, whoever his name was. I don't know if we gave his name or not, but I would be so supportive of what he's doing, because the problem with UCF is they did a bait and switch.
Mm-hmm.
If you think you're paying for one thing and you get a completely different format, you think you're getting a traditional professor, going to meet multiple times, get to interact with, and then you end up expected to do a lot of the learning on your own, even if it's through a lot of technology. I would be disgruntled as well.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you this. Last year, one of the clients I work with, both the parents were college professors, both for 30 years, actually. One was a history professor and one was a political science professor. And they vehemently did not feel that this model worked well in their setting. They felt like the teacher engagement was reduced, and it's more about cost savings for the institution, and your experience diminished educational and academic quality. But there are different opinions. There are people that say that having the supermaster teacher combined with the creativity and the resources works really well. And it's still relatively new, so I still think a lot of the kinks are getting worked out. But I want our listeners to know that this is a trend as schools look to save costs, as well as look to take advantage of all that this information age and all that this technological world that we live in has to offer. What are you thinking, Anika?
Well, I'm thinking about the comment from one of the professors where he said that, the enrollment in his class was 800, but he didn't expect over 50 students to show up each week to his classroom. So do you think that's a justifiable reason to switch things up? Is because students, even when they did have it, they weren't all committed to it? Should that be a concern?
Yeah. One of the problems I see with the model is it works a lot better for a self-motivated, very self-motivated and very self-disciplined student. Because it puts a lot more of the onus and responsibility on the student to be furthering their work for the class outside of the classroom without as much accountability with the teacher. And now, I don't want to paint it all with a broadside brush because, technology is in some cases being really used to track certain things.
Right.
But that's definitely one of the downsides is it can be a slacker can slack off a lot easier, I feel, in this model.
Yeah, I can see that.
And students are suspect because they know that it's being motivated by cost savings a lot of times. And they're like, hey, I'm paying a lot of money and you're going cheap on me.
Well, that's valid, right? I would think so.
I wanted to present a lot of the positives though, because when done well, it can be really, really, really good. And it tends to work better in some subjects than others. But it's still, even that, around 2012, Anika, this is all I was hearing. MOOCs, they're taking over the world. It's the whole new generation. This is, college of the future. But a lot of the ones, struggled financially and they're still figuring out and working out their kinks. That's what I would say.
So big takeaway for us parents, Mark, is that something that we ask the admissions officer when we're visiting these schools, when we're having these interviews? When does this point of conversation come up to find out how that institution is functioning, all the models that they're using?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is a great conversation to have with the admission officer. It's also a great conversation to have with the department chair or someone in the department of what the majors that you're looking at. It's also a great conversation to have with current students.
All right. And
so you just don't want to, you don't want to get blindsided.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
Yeah, so our chapter today, which we're discussing, is how to select a test prep or tutoring company. And for those of your first-time listeners, when I say chapter, I wrote a book called 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions. And in segment 2 of our podcast, we go chapter by chapter through that book and hit on a couple of key points. And so what were your takeaways from this chapter? Anika, why don't you comment on some things and then I'll comment on what you comment on.
Well, you have a fine list there of considerations to make when we're trying to find a test prep company or a person too, I suppose, or, a test prep individual. And your list just so happened to begin with one that I practically could not imagine not doing without, and that is working through referrals. Like, I've always been a firm believer. It's just, from my experience, there just seems to be approximately 3 cotillion people out there trying to make a quick buck. And even the ones that aren't all about the money, they just aren't that good, so you just don't know. It's just like a random pick if you don't have any good, faith or any good referral to go on. And I'll let you highlight the 10, 12, or maybe even 15 considerations that you made. But before you do that, I'll tell you that my biggest takeaway, specifically when you're vetting a company or organization that does test prep, was to not put so much emphasis on the company itself, but the individual teacher. Because as you say,
Correct.
All teachers are not created equal, even in the best organizations. And both Jay and Naya, mostly Naya, likability for her, oh my gosh, is so key for how well she's going to do. And not just test prep, but just in the classroom in general. Because I relate that back to the classroom when this girl had a teacher she could not stand. Oh my goodness. And it almost impacted her outcome. Obviously we had to work through it, and that's not going to be the last bad teacher she has. But I just totally agree that just not, it's just that match. It's the same with the school. It's the same with, with the test prep tutor. It's about the match. It's about the likability, about that chemistry is incredibly important. Incredibly important.
No, I agree 100%. And one thing I want to say is I don't want anybody to feel bad if they feel like I wasn't really planning on having a test prep pro or a tutoring company. Like, some people don't need it. Some people can teach themselves on their own. Some people excel without it. So I don't want to imply if you don't have this then there's somehow something wrong with you. But most people will benefit from it. The majority of people will. Majority of people, this will be a good investment of their resources, because we've talked about this many times. Test scores count a lot in this process unless it's a test optional school. And the tests have been proven that they're coachable. Okay. For the longest time, the test prep companies said, especially the SAT, because they were claiming to measure IQ, that this is not a coachable test. And that's been so disproven now. But some other things to think about is, does the philosophy of the company match your own belief system? That's important. Can you sit in and observe? That's important. What type of guarantee, if any, do they offer? Because you'll see a wide range of different guarantees and no guarantees at all. What type of stats do they indicate are typical in terms of what you can expect in terms of improvement, and what type of documentation is there for that? Obviously, there's other things like, how does it fit your schedule logistically and time-wise and location-wise and cost-wise, right? Those are things to be expected. But it's an important process that you don't want to just willy-nilly just dive on in, because it really, really can make a big difference, just like a great teacher and a mediocre teacher can make a difference in how your kids learn. It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
This week's question is from Miss Tracy from Ohio. And Tracy wants to know, if a student needs financial aid and they are transferring, is there money available, or is the money only for new students? What say you?
That is a great question, Tracy from Ohio, and I do appreciate you asking that. So let's talk about this, first of all, from the loan standpoint and then the grant standpoint. And so even if you're looking at loans, you still, complete the FAFSA to get federal loans. And you are going to have to complete the FAFSA, and you're going to have to enter the 6-digit code for the institution that you're now attending. Okay. And the other thing that's important is that when you left your previous school, okay, it will be reported to the Department of Education through their National Student Loan Data System that you left, but you're still going to have to communicate with all prior lenders you're attending a new school. Okay, your loan servicer and any other lenders, you have to. If not, they could think that your loan, that you could start to be forced to have to make payments right away, because it could look like you dropped out. So that's on the loan side. Also, one school may require the FAFSA, another school may require the CSS profile. That's important to keep in mind. But let's jump to where Tracy was really going with the question, which is the free money, grants and scholarships. Okay. And it's very important to know that every institution is different when it comes to this. But there are a lot of colleges that will offer less financial assistance, institutional grants and scholarships, to transfer students than they will to incoming freshmen. That is very common. So I want to say some more things, but why do you think that would be true, Anika?
Well, they've got priorities, right? They've got to take care of the kids who show genuine and initial interest in them. So they got to make sure they're covered. And as we know, resources are not that great or that grand in all cases. So it sounds to me like a matter of prioritizing.
Right. But why do they prioritize? Because the transfer student could be expressing a lot of interest. They could be expressing even more interest than the freshman.
Well, not necessarily. Well, I guess the way I saw it, the way I'm trying to convey it is that this student already chose this institution. Like you're already in it. So now here's this new group coming as an afterthought because you didn't like where you went. So now you want to come to us.
I see.
That's the way I see it.
I see it. So you're looking at it like, okay, this is like you're not the first love.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Yes.
So that's an interesting perspective. I would say it has more to do with the fact that schools' models expect for a large number of freshmen to have to come. And so that's prioritized just because in order to fill their class, they've slotted large numbers of incoming freshmen. And so that's one of the reasons why they're prioritized. Also, sometimes the perception is that if you are a transfer student, you are so desperate to leave that you're going to make it happen. And you'll find a way to come up with the money. So I think it has more to do with the large number of slots they need to fill in the freshman class, and the fact that if you're desperate enough to leave, then you're going to find a way to come up with the money. But so it's very common for different financial packages to be offered for transfer students and freshmen, and it's very common for the transfers to receive less. It's also important to note that some institutions offer less college-based assistance if students transfer in the spring versus the fall. That can make a difference, because in their budget, they've allocated most of the money to the fall because that's when most people come in. And once again, when you come in the spring, most of that money has already been allocated. So some schools differentiate between fall and spring. There are schools that don't offer any transfer money at all. There are also schools that offer very generous transfer policies when it comes to money. So these are the things you want to find out in advance. And I don't know if you knew this, Anika, but a lot of schools have an admission officer that's like a transfer counselor. They're like like they specialize in transfer admissions. That's very common. So that's one thing that I would say to anybody is reach out to the school, find out, is there a transfer specialist, a transfer counselor, and that'd be a great person for you to communicate with. Now, I like to do a lot of this email so that you have a lot of stuff in writing and there's a track record. And you definitely are going to want to complete the net price calculator. You can find the net price calculator on every website. It is required to be on every college website ever since October of 2011. They should take your transfer status into consideration in their projected amount that you will have to pay after you complete the calculator. I just wish all calculators were really good, and we probably need to do a whole podcast on how to help people discern a great net price calculator from an inaccurate one, but nevertheless, they're worth doing. But that's where a good place to start, in this process. So the bottom line is, institutional aid is precious, and money is part of your enrollment management strategy. And so because freshmen are prioritized, because once again, the large numbers that are needed to fill the class, more often than not, you'll find that the policies for freshmen are different from transfers, but it's so case by case. It's so case by case that I wouldn't want the takeaway from this to be, transfer's not getting any money. That should not be the takeaway. Right. The takeaway should be it's all over the place in terms of school policy. So buyer beware and do your homework.
Yeah. And Mark, can I just add that my own institution, they actually have a scholarship that's entitled a transfer initiative where they're trying to draw in students. So that's, definitely another opportunity. I don't know how common that is, obviously, but
no, it's pretty common.
But it exists. So
what's not common is that there's like 500 of them, right?
Right. Right? One that I know of. Excellent points.
Oh, there is one more thing that I think is important to add, and that is, so a lot of times when people are thinking about money, they're just thinking about, okay, what's the bottom line? Are they asking me to pay 40 or are they asking me to pay 20 or what am I being asked to pay? Right? But another extremely important thing that transfers need to be aware of is how are your credits going to transfer in? That, because that's a financial decision in and of itself, right?
Ooh, yeah.
The average transfer student takes an extra year to graduate. So you want to look at, are the credits transferable at all for credit? And then if they do they fill requirements within the major? Or do they just transfer as general credit, but you still have a lot of major department courses you're going to have to retake? So that's something you really, really, really want to do and find that out. That's very, very important because that's a big part of the financial fit. What are you thinking over there in the North Carolina? By the way, do you have snow or cold over there?
I'm waiting for it. It's 7:50 p.m. It's supposed to hit it sometime tonight. So
you get so many days off work for snow, and you're just like 2 states over from me.
Exactly, and I don't like it because I get so far behind in work.
You're such a workaholic.
Cannot work from home though.
Well, you're very dutiful and very committed. You really are. Friends, we have received so many emails from all across the country and text messages saying how much they have enjoyed part one and part two with Rick Clark, where he talked about how to properly handle deferrals, denials, wait lists, and acceptance decisions. If you didn't hear episode 49 and 50, strongly encourage you to go back and listen. Rick's back for one more week, and this time we're doing something totally different. We're talking about Georgia Tech. And it's a very hot school, and we're talking about some of the distinctive things and things you don't know about Georgia Tech. So listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Super excited to be back with Rick Clark again. Thank you, Rick, for joining us for the third week in a row.
Happy to do it.
So I couldn't have Rick here and not talk to him about Georgia Tech. It's just a fantastic school, but I think there are a lot of stereotypes and a lot of things that Georgia Tech does well that a lot of people don't know, and we want to explore that today. So Rick, why don't you first start by just giving us kind of sort of your elevator pitch, right? Your 90-second to 2-minute overview of Tech.
Sure. So Georgia Tech is a mid-sized public university. We are in Midtown Atlanta, so where kind of business and community come together. We've got the Coca-Cola headquarters in our backyard, but we also have, a big neighborhood right here and a major shopping area, lots of professional sporting events. So we're in a really exciting part of the city. We are obviously well known for things like engineering and computer science, but the business program, sciences, architecture, and liberal arts, especially some of those programs like international affairs and public policy, are excellent. And I think, especially right now, important for students to be looking at a Georgia Tech for some of those programs that we haven't traditionally been as known for, because that intersection of where STEM and business, for instance, come together, or the way technology intersects with communication. That is our wheelhouse, and that's something that we've always kind of been about. But the way that the world has sort of shifted and changed has really made a Georgia Tech education in any of those fields really relevant, important, and also marketable. I think that's one of the big things to know. And then the last thing is just, the type of kids we draw. Just a place that draws students who love to kind of ask why, look around and try to figure out how to make things better, no matter what their field or passion or interest is. And then you also have just sort of a traditional campus here with major sports that kind of add into the spirit of it. So a great place to be, I think, a place that students enjoy, and also a place that kind of continues to really be on the rise.
Awesome. And what would you say has changed at Georgia Tech since you arrived, and what changes do you envision over the next 10 to 15 years?
Well, for the work I do in terms of admission, I mean, just the interest from around the country and around the world has exploded. 100% increase over a decade, and then another 100% increase in applications over just the last 5 years. So from the time I got here till now, it's 4 times the amount of applications. So in my world of Georgia Tech, that's the biggest change. In the world of Georgia Tech, period, I would say it is this incubator, innovator, entrepreneur, startup type of mentality. And not only in the students that we are bringing here, but also in Midtown Atlanta all around us. So you've got, ATDC, you've got the Coda building, you've got the AT&T Foundry. I mean, just, if you're a student on the East Coast and you're looking to be part of a startup culture, arguably there's really no better place to be than Georgia Tech in Midtown Atlanta.
And I've really experienced that the last few times I've been on your campus, just talking to professors, talking to kids. I'm like, is this the new Silicon Valley here?
Yeah, it is. There is no doubt. I was actually in line at Chick-fil-A the other day on campus, and I heard this kid say, hey, how you doing, man? I haven't seen you all semester. What'd you do this summer? And, one kid was like, I was actually doing investment banking down in Sao Paulo. And he's like, what about you? And he's like, I was here working on my startup, And I was thinking to myself, what did I do this summer, man? I know I went to Disney World and took my kids to, so
that was hilarious. So Rick, you and I, we've talked quite a bit in the past about institutional priorities and how important they are. What are some institutional priorities for tech?
Yeah. I mean, one of the big things is that we really want to continue to be known and excel in all subject areas that we teach. So, I mean, one thing that's cool about Georgia Tech is we are not all things to all people. We're not a flagship university. We're not a comprehensive university. We've got 35 majors. And the philosophy on that is, does the world need it? And do we think we can do it better than anyone else? And if we say yes to both of those, that's sort of what we're about. But traditionally, of course, engineering and computer science, especially recently, have been the very top heavy part of Georgia Tech. But from an institutional priority standpoint, we really are trying to draw kids from all over the country, all over the state, all over the world who want to be the best and want to really, excel in any area, be that business or architecture or the sciences, et cetera. So for us, we're putting a lot of emphasis on that, both in the way we recruit and the way we enroll students, is to be a more sort of balanced academic institution.
Yeah, and something you said earlier, I was really glad you said this in your intro, that you have some strong offerings in the liberal arts, public policy, and others. Can you comment on that? Because I find that's one of the things people really don't know, and I know I didn't know that before I moved to Atlanta. I mean, I've known for decades that Georgia Tech, powerhouse computer science, powerhouse engineering, but I've really been impressed with what you guys are doing in the liberal arts. Shed a little more light on that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so that's where I think you're right. People don't know, but when you think about it, it does sort of make sense. I mean, we are in Atlanta, right? A major business center. We are in the capital of our state. And I guess you could say the capital of the South in a lot of ways. And so the access to government, the access to the intersection between government and business really sits right here in Atlanta and right here at Georgia Tech as well. So people like Sam Nunn, for instance, are on campus at Georgia Tech and involved heavily in that international affairs program and sort of that international vision and reach that intersect with a lot of those programs, like history, like public policy, like international affairs and modern languages, that sort of global view that Georgia Tech has always had, and also that technology filter and that technology lens that we use is what's cool, I think, really about our liberal arts program. So, for instance, we don't have just a history program. First of all of our degrees are bachelors of science, right? So it's a bachelor's of science in history, technology, and society. So the whole way that's taught is, look, nothing would have ever changed over time if it hadn't been for the evolution of technology. And I think people really in this sort of culture and climate do get that that's true. I mean, you look around you and think how technology changes the way we live. Technology changes the way we communicate. Technology changes the way we travel. And that's really always been the case. It's just that the rapidity of change now is unlike any other time in human history. And so that's what I think is so great about Georgia Tech and the liberal arts is, and it is kind of common sense, but those kids come out with, they're taking computer science classes. They're taking calculus classes. They have those sort of chops from a technical standpoint that are becoming more and more invaluable in any profession and in any niche within society.
One thing I just realized we never touched on, when I think of a lot of the schools you compete with, the MITs, the Carnegie Mellons, the Caltechs, a lot of them aren't able to offer sort of ACC athletics. You want to say anything about that as sort of a balancing fact and sort of what component that brings from a fun and leisure standpoint to the campus?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I always say like what we have on a lot of those schools is, better weather, nicer people, and big sports. So someone may argue that, but they can come down here and we'll have that conversation. But I mean, that's something that I certainly love. I mean, granted, I'm an Atlanta native. I admit to be somewhat biased, but I mean, being in the heart of the South as far as big time athletics it's just something you cannot replicate on another college experience. I mean, and it's not for everybody, right? I mean, that kids
Mm-hmm.
go to lots of places that don't have sports at all, or compete on the
Mm-hmm.
Division III level. But for a student who does want that sort of commonality and that bonding experience that just really is not able to be replicated in any other fashion. The big time sports of the ACC make this place a fun place to be. I mean, on a spring day after you take a differential equations exam, you can go out and watch a baseball team play against Florida State or Boston College or something like that. And it adds some fun. It adds school spirit. It adds a common bond across our students, but also across our alumni. And one of the things we've talked about before is, I think as much as anything, the reason you go to college, when we make that argument of why college, yeah, some of it is the technical knowledge and understanding and the degree, but a lot of it's about the network. And I do
Mm-hmm.
think that sports add in a different level of connection to the network that plays dividends, down the road. It's interesting, but it's true.
Well, I went to Michigan State, and anywhere I go, there's an immediate bond. You could be anywhere in the country and go to a Michigan State sports bar, and it's actually be a great way if I was looking for work to to network and get a job. I'm serious. So there's definitely something to that. You get the green and white in your blood, and that's true for obviously it's true for your Penn States, your Ohio States. A lot of schools would can claim that as well. Let's talk about the student that does really well at Tech. Any similarities you've learned over the years? I mean, you're the admissions guy, so you're looking for these PQs, personal qualities, as well as academic qualities and everything else. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the kind of kid that does well, frankly, is someone who, I mean, they like to work. I mean, our kids are workers. They, they kind of enjoy getting their hands dirty, rolling up their sleeves, and figuring stuff out. I mean, I say that a lot of times our kids are grinders in a good way. They like to just hone in on something and really figure it out and get kind of passionate and almost kind of wonked out on stuff. The other thing, though, that I think surprises people, because back to what you're saying earlier about sort of stereotypes or inaccuracies, is a lot of people have this idea that Georgia Tech kids are down in some basement with a lab coat on, like closely inspecting some colored liquid, alone, and the lights are flickering and all that. But the truth is that the kids that do well here they're big time collaborators. I mean, they like to work in teams. They're comfortable leveraging each other's strengths. I think they're humble enough to know they don't have all the answers, that they need each other. And we see this in, we have this thing here called the Inventure Prize. It's like sort of Shark Tank for college students. And we also have something called Grand Challenges. And this is the idea of this is to solve the world's wicked problems. And, those kids are working in these teams and they look around, they're like, I can code this, but man, I cannot market this. Or, I can figure out how the policy of this works, but I do not understand sort of how we're going to make the hardware kind of go. And that's what I love, is that our kids, they're bright, but I do think they're humble, and they sort of know and see where they need to work together to solve these problems and to improve things.
So one of the stereotypes I hear, because I'm not going to let you off of the all softball questions, is that Georgia Tech can be stressful. Is that is that accurate? Inaccurate? What are your thoughts?
I think it is accurate. I mean, it is a tough school. You don't just come here and kind of leisurely, while away the days and somebody hands you a degree 4 years later. And part of that is the other students that are here. I mean, this goes back to the kind of kids we draw, though. Like, they want to be around people who are going to make them better. And we talk a lot about that in an admission committee is, does this person surround themselves by quality people, and do they want to continue to improve? And if you're built that way and you're wired that way and you come here, then you're gonna see other people who are similar. They're smart, they're hard workers, they're achieving, those are not bad things. And so some of it, I think, comes from that. And then some of it, of course, comes from the fact that I mean, this is technical information. I mean, a lot of our students are taking labs, and they're taking technical information that's ever changing, and so that's just not going to be easy. So part of the stress is that it's difficult, and part of the stress is they have high expectations for themselves. And so the combination of those, but it's also interesting because like when you come to kids though, this is almost inevitable with the kids that answer phones for us or give tours, or just like I sponsor some programs here. I've taught class here, and you ask them, when it comes to exams, like, how you doing? How you feeling? Are you stressed or whatever? And most of the time they're like, I think I got it. I haven't slept much lately, but I'm feeling pretty good. I mean, I hear that almost always when I ask the question when it comes to final exams. I think that's really telling.
Nice.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Do you know where admission officers, college counselors, college presidents, deans, and other leaders turn to keep abreast of admissions trends and changes in the college landscape? Well, my number one go-to source, and the number one go-to source of most admissions officers, college counselors, college leaders, is Inside Higher Ed. And our faithful listeners will know we regularly feature Inside Higher Ed articles in our In the News discussions. Well, Inside Higher Ed also produces 60-minute must-listen-to webinars every month that will really keep your knowledge of college up to date and accurate. So the recommended resource for episode 51 are the newsletters and the webinars produced by Inside Higher Ed. Now, here's the great news. All of this cutting-edge information is completely free. I reached out to Scott Jasick, the editor of Inside Higher Ed, and I asked him what is the best way to bring this content to our listening family. Here is what Scott said. I am happy to sign up any of your listeners for our weekly admissions email to anyone you want. So please tell the people all they need to do is just send me their name, their email, their job title, and if they're a parent, just say I'm a parent, and Scott will sign you up. I can't recommend this highly enough. So to sign up, just send an email to Scott, SCOTT Jasick. That's J as in jump, A as in apple, S as in sun, H as in hat, I as in idea, and K as in kite at InsideHigherEd.com. I can't recommend their newsletters and their webinars any more highly. I'll now return to my interview with Rick Clark, the Director of Undergraduate Admission at Georgia Tech, as he continues to discuss what people don't know about Georgia Tech. So last question for you. What can Georgia Tech, where can Georgia Tech improve? Rick's in charge. You got your magic wand. You can get anything you want, over the next 10 years. What do you think Georgia Tech needs to do to even go to a higher level?
I think the thing that I'm most concerned about, and I think this is an answer to your question that we can do better, is, we have something called the Georgia Tech Promise Program, right? So this is a program that allows students from Georgia to come to Georgia Tech and graduate debt-free if their family's household income is $33,000 or less. What I'm concerned about, what I think that we can do a better job of, is sort of that middle income student in particular. I am concerned that as tuition costs go up and other associated costs go up, I really think that we need to continue to engage our alumni and look for ways to raise money so that we can offset some of those costs. The big thing about tech is we do have a strong return on investment. So the average starting salary for students nationally last year was a little under $50,000. The average starting salary for a Georgia Tech student was about $70,000.
Nice.
And yet we were very similar to the average debt, right? So our kids were leaving on average, just like most kids around the country were leaving on average, with about $30,000 in debt. So the math of return on investment says we're doing really well. But when you get down to individual students, especially in individual segments like that, that's where those averages get driven up, because you got kids that can write the check and you got kids at the bottom who are getting programs like the Tech Promise, but the averages get drawn up by kids in the middle. And I just think we can and need to do a better job of, when we talk about diversity, right? People love to point to things like race, or they love to point to things like major geography, but that's socioeconomic. If you look around our country right now, that's one of the biggest things for higher education is,
Definitely.
maintaining diversity from a socioeconomic standpoint. So, there's probably other things, if you ask me that question tomorrow, that I could come up with, but right now, that's something I think a lot about and really want to continue to charge our own alums with, and even our students while they're here. Your experience is always made more rich when you have a lot of people from a lot of different places, and that includes, economic background.
Thanks a bunch, Rick. Really appreciate you doing this. Our listeners don't know, but Rick and I were talking before the interview, and he said he may be in the office till as late as 11 tomorrow. And so to give me this time here, precious time, I really, really appreciate it. Any closing comments or thoughts?
No, I just really appreciate it, Mark. And again, I do hope people will check out that blog that we put out there. We've got a lot of different people writing for us now, and again, we try to keep it really general, personal, and encouraging. Those are really our goals. So, thanks again for having me, though. I've enjoyed it.
Did you give the website last time? I don't know if you did.
I did. Let me give it again. It's found on our homepage. It's admission.gatech.edu, and you can just find it there in that horizontal nav. Just says blog. You can subscribe if you want to, but otherwise you can just go there. The other thing is I am on Twitter at GT Admission. And
Great.
We always put the blog out on Twitter, as well as trying to just, again, be a resource for folks. Sometimes it's Georgia Tech, won a basketball game, but a lot of times it's stuff that we think will really help people in the admission process.
Great. And I know, last thing, actually, why don't you say a word on the book you and Brennan? Brennan's been on our show before, Brennan Barnard. We've both featured his articles with the Post, as well as we interviewed him as well. Why don't you say a word or two about the book you have coming out? Because we want to promote that when it comes out.
Absolutely. So, Brennan Barnard and I are working on a book, and the idea is that, we're trying to give this sort of balanced approach, right, where I'm talking a lot from my experience on the college side, and he's speaking from the secondary side. And really, basically, at the end of the day, the book is not about, how to get into college. It's not about getting in. It's really a book for families about staying together. And so what we're trying to do is really just identify these key things that we see families in our experience get divided over, these wedges that they get divided over, and how do you go through the process in a more intentional way so that you can't control, where it ends up, but you can absolutely control how your family ends up getting onto a college campus. And so that is really, the thrust of it. We're expecting it to be out in early December of 2019. That's the timeline we're looking at.
Well, good luck with that, because I've done a couple of projects, and it's very challenging accomplishing that goal. So I'll give you till February on that one. But
all right, we appreciate it.
Thanks a bunch, though. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Mark. Take care.
Friends, I left Georgia Tech and I got back to my home, and I realized that I had forgot to ask Rick a very important question. So I emailed my question to Rick, and I want to share his response with you. My question was, Rick, one of the reasons my students, and definitely their parents, like Georgia Tech is because of your great co-op program. What can you tell our listeners about your co-op program? Here's Rick's response, and he gave us 5 bullet points. Number 1, we have one of the largest volunteer programs in the country. Number 2, students work for 3 to 4 semesters, and they get paid by the companies they work for, but they don't have to pay tuition during the time they are doing their co-op work job. Number 3, students who participate in their co-op program typically average more job offers, and they receive about 10% higher starting salary than those who don't. And keep in mind, Georgia Tech grads come out making about $75,000, so about 10% means you're getting about an extra $7,500. Fourth, Georgia Tech has partnerships with companies in over half of the Global 500. For those of you who are not familiar with the Global 500, is basically the 500 largest companies in the world. And lastly, you can do your co-op in Atlanta if you want, but we have co-op opportunities all around the country and internationally. Now, let me just add this. I absolutely love co-op programs. My brother did multiple co-op programs when he was majoring in engineering at the University of Waterloo in Canada, and I saw the benefits he received. And he has since then brought a co-op program to the University of Denver, where he lives now, and he did an MBA there. So in addition to helping pay tuition, increasing your odds of getting a job, and in addition to the fact that you often get a higher paying job, co-ops can really help you confirm the type of work that you like to do and the type of environment you will thrive in. I found a great definition of co-op programs from the College Affordability Guide I want to share with you. A co-op program incorporates paid professional career training into a typical degree. Students alternate their time in the classroom with significant time, example 3 semesters, in a real workforce setting. In addition to earning an hourly wage for their work, many participants receive academic credit or transcript notation when they've successfully completed their co-op program. Co-ops are focused on training students for a career in their chosen major, example IT, engineering, etc. To that end, universities often partner with employers in government, industry, business, nonprofits, and more. Depending on the co-op job, students may end up working across the country or even overseas. However, each participant is usually supervised by a professional who has followed the same career path. The overall goal of a co-op program is to give students a combination of theory plus practice and knowledge plus experience. Participants go through a continuous cycle of learning, applying and reflecting on their education while they earn money to pay for college. Finally, this is what the College Affordability Guide says about Georgia Tech's co-op program. Georgia Tech was the 4th school in the United States to offer a co-op model of education back in 1912, over 100 years ago. And students often get paid $10,000 for their co-op job, sometimes less and sometimes more.
Next week in the news, a tale of 2 institutions. Amherst and Wisconsin take education down different paths. And we'll be in chapter 52 of 171 answers, and we'll be talking through whether your child would do better with online, one-on-one, or group test prep. And next week's question wants to know if the high school counselor is the person responsible for sending a student's test scores to colleges. And Mark interview for next week. Miss Elaine Griffin-Rubin is back. Elaine is the senior contributor and communication specialist with Advisors, and they are walking through the 9 different federal loan repayment options. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you found this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that could really use this information. Your College Bound Kid is produced by John Lockenbaugh. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo. And marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. If you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on the show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions with an S at yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.